Hi, I'm Thomas Barker and I've just finished the St Kilda Arts Alive art crawl. This exhibition I've produced a part of my PhD study. That PhD study is on essentially something I found an intrinsic aesthetic issue with Melbourne, which is that often we've rested on our white Anglo-Celtic ancestry and built vast tracts of suburbia. Those vast tracts of suburbia generally represent themselves as the same building over and over again. However, since the end of the White Australia policy in 1970 to the early 1980s, what I found is that, or what Australia has found rather, is that roughly 49% of the population is migrant or the children of migrants. And these predominantly come from Asia and the Southeast Asian region. This also includes Africa. If we as a society choose to develop, modern architectural concepts generally rest on redefining the wheel. I felt that rather than looking at what we currently tend to look at, which is sort of modernist conventions, that we instead should look at what is known as vernacular architecture. Over the next 6 years for my PhD, I'll be looking at vernacular architecture, which is essentially identifying the bulk cultures of recent migrants, and with those migrants, their traditional forms of building and architecture. That architecture is essentially known as peasant architecture. It's known as owner-built architecture. The cultures themselves, however, have an important expression through their own home. We only have to look at people like Bouchard and their Poetics of Space to understand that architecture, as the way we live in it, intrinsically touches our soul and our own psyche. For migrant cultures who have been uprooted from their existing cultures, pushed into Australia and forced to live in what is white Anglo-Celtic traditions, this can be a disassociative factor when talking about their socio-economic and social positions. My research hopes to re-enliven their capacity as individuals to actually join in with modern Australia, as they are modern Australians. In this way, by looking at the architecture of their ancestry, the planning regimes, the aesthetic qualities, the motifs, and the ways of life, as well as community structure and housing structure of communities themselves, and then trying to impose or translate this language into modern Australian conventions through abiding to the National Code of Australia, the Building Code and Residential Code, also using a common materiality and building techniques that these cultures will actually find when they arrive in Australia, that rather than being forced to completely change their lives and everything that they know, that there is housing for them that accommodates them. The other thing about this is, as we move into a modern culture ourselves, many architects and planning schemes are looking at alternative ways of thinking of architecture. My hypothesis is that many of these ways of thinking have already been accomplished, and it's only us, or me, who needs to look into our history in order to help define our future. In this way, what you've seen in this exhibition, though only a small part, is me looking at a cross range of cultures, being Filipino sea nomads, Yao people from the hills of Vietnam, the sedentary Kurdish people from Afghanistan, and also South Sudanese Dinkan people, and brief, small A2 expressions of their forms of building. Their forms of building show us things like concepts that we take for granted in modern society, such as modulation and temporary dwelling structures. It also, on a spiritual level, has various connections to their various unique belief systems. For instance, the Dinkan tribal people in recent media have been suggested to be patriarchal societies. If you look at their architecture and the way they actually build houses only for the wives, and that the patriarchy is almost non-existent, which means that we as individuals need to learn about the cultures that will form the future Australia, being that they're generally matriarchal rather than patriarchal. They're extended families rather than singular 2.5 units, or 3.5 units being mum, dad and 1.5 children. And they also engage with a whole wealth of their broader social structure, including cottage industries and the ways that they themselves economically engage with their community. This is the start of me looking at ways of redefining suburbia. And that suburbia will be delivered from my pen as a means of expressing to everyone, including the volume building industry and council and the general public, by a graphic novel of experience, how actually houses should be informed, and talk with us as individuals that truly, aside from all other beliefs, stem from our very own homes. Thank you.